the green umbrage whence it issued. "Our destination is yonder," exclaimed Luke, pointing in the direction of the vapour. "I'm glad to hear it," cried Turpin, "as well as to perceive there is some one awake. That smoke holds out a prospect of breakfast. No smoke without fire, as old Lady Scanmag said, and I'll wager a trifle that fire was not lighted for the fater fellows to count their fingers by. We shall find 3 sticks, and a black pot with a kid seething in it, I'll engage. These gipsies have picked out a prettyish spot to quarter in, quite picturesque, as one may say, and but for that telltale smoke, which looks for all the world like a Dutch skipper blowing his morning cloud, no one need know of their vicinity. A pretty place, upon my soul." The spot, in sooth, merited Turpin's eulogium. It was a little valley in the midst of wooded hills, so secluded that not a single habitation appeared in view, clothed with timber to the very summits, excepting on the side where the party stood, which verged upon the declivity. These mountainous ridges presented a broken outline of foliage, variegated with tinted masses of bright orange, timber, and deepest green. 4 hills hemmed in the valley. Here and there a grey slab of rock might be discerned amongst the wood, and a mountain ash figured conspicuously upon a jutting crag immediately below them. Deep sunken in the ravine, and concealed in part from view by the wild herbage and dwarf shrubs, ran a range of precipitous rocks, severed, it would seem, by some diluvial convulsion, from the opposite mountain side, as a corresponding rift was there visible, in which the same dip of strata might be observed, together with certain ribbed cavities, matching huge bolts of rock which had once locked these stony walls together. Washing this cliff swept a clear stream, well known and well regarded, as it waxed in width, by the honest brethren of the angle, who seldom, however, tracked it to its rise amongst these hills. The stream found its way into the valley through a chasm far to the left, and rushed thundering down the mountain side in a boiling cascade. The valley was approached in this direction from Rookwood by an unfrequented carriage road, which Luke had, from prudential reasons, avoided. All seemed consecrated to silence, to solitude, to the hush of nature. Yet this quiet scene was the chosen retreat of lawless depredators, and had erstwhile been the theatre of feudal oppression. We have said that no habitation was visible, that no dwelling tenanted by man could be seen, but following the spur of the furthest mountain hill, some traces of a stone wall might be discovered, and upon a natural platform of rock stood a stern, square tower, which had once been the donjon of the castle, the lords of which had called the 4 hills their own. A watch-tower had then crowned each eminence, every vestige of which had, however, long since disappeared. Sequestered in the vale stood the priory before alluded to, a monastery of Grey Friars, of the order of St. Francis, some of the venerable walls of which were still remaining; and if they had not reverted to the bat and the owl, as is wont to be the fate of such sacred structures, their cloistered shrines were devoted to beings whose natures partook, in some measure, of the instincts of those creatures of the night, a people whose deeds were of darkness, and whose eyes shunned the light. Here the gipsies had pitched their tent; and though the place was often, in part, deserted by the vagrant horde, yet certain of the tribe, who had grown into years, over whom Barbara Lovel held queenly sway, made it their haunt, and was suffered by the authorities of the neighborhood to remain unmolested. A lenient piece of policy, which, in our infinite regard for the weal of the tawny tribe, we recommend to the adoption of all other justices and knights of the shire. Bidding his grandsire have regard to his seat, Luke leapt a high bank, and, followed by Turpin, began to descend the hill. Peter, however, took care to provide for himself. The descent was so perilous, and the footing so insecure, that he chose rather to trust to such conveyance as nature had furnished him with, than to hazard his neck by any false step of the horse. He contrived, therefore, to slide off from behind, shaping his own course in a more secure direction. He who has wandered amidst the Alps must have often had occasion to witness the wonderful sure-footedness of the mountain pilot, the mule. He must have remarked how, with tenacious hoof, he will claw the rock, and drag himself from one impending fragment to another, with perfect security to his rider; how he will breast the roaring currents of air, and stand unshrinking at the verge of almost unfathomable ravines. But it is not so with the horse. Fleet on the plain, careful over rugged ground, he is timid and uncertain on the hillside, and the risk incurred by Luke and Turpin in their descent of the almost perpendicular sides of the cliff was tremendous. Peter watched them in their descent with some admiration, and with much contempt. "He will break his neck of a surety," said he; "but what matters it? As well now as hereafter." So saying, he approached the verge of the precipice, where he could see them more distinctly. The passage along which Luke rode had never before been traversed by horse's hoof. Cut in the rock, it presented a steep zigzag path amongst the hills, without any defence for the foot traveller, except such as was afforded by a casual clinging shrub, and no protection whatever existed for a horseman. The possibility of any one attempting the passage not having, in all probability, entered into the calculation of those who framed it. Added to this, the steps were of such unequal heights, and withal so narrow, that the danger was proportionately increased. "10,000 devils!" cried Turpin, staring downwards. "Is this the best road you've got?" "You will find one more easy," replied Luke, "if you ride for a quarter of a mile down the wood, and then return by the brookside. You will meet me at the priory." "No," answered the highwayman, boldly. "If you go, I go too. It shall never be said that Dick Turpin was afraid to follow where another would lead. Proceed." Luke gave his horse the bridle, and the animal slowly and steadily commenced the descent, fixing his forelegs upon the steps, and drawing his hinder limbs carefully after him. Here it was that the lightness and steadiness of Turpin's mare was completely shown. No Alpine mule could have borne its rider with more apparent ease and safety. Turpin encouraged her by hand and word, but she needed it not. The sexton saw them, and, tracking their giddy descent, he became more interested than he anticipated. His attention was suddenly drawn towards Luke. "He's gone!" cried Peter. "He falls! He sinks! My plans are all defeated! The last link is snapped!" "No," added he, recovering his wonted composure, "his end is not so fated." Rook had missed his footing. He rolled stumbling down the precipice a few yards. Luke's fate seemed inevitable. His feet were entangled in the stirrup. He could not free himself. A birch tree, growing in a chink of the precipice, arrested his further fall. But for this timely aid, all had been over. Here Luke was enabled to extricate himself from the stirrup, and to regain his feet. Seizing the bridle, he dragged his faulty steed back again to the road. "You've had a narrow escape, by Jove," said Turpin, who had been thunderstruck with the whole proceeding. "Those big cattle are always clumsy. Devilish lucky it's no worse." It was now comparatively smooth travelling, but they had not as yet reached the valley, and it seemed to be Luke's object to take a circuitous path. This was so evident that Turpin could not help commenting upon it. Luke evaded the question. "The crag is steep there," said he. "Besides, to tell you the truth, I want to surprise them." "Ha, ha, ha, ha!" laughed Dick. "Surprise them, eh? What a pity the birch tree was in the way. You would have done it properly then. Egad, here's another surprise." Dick's last exclamation was caused by his having suddenly come upon a wide gully in the rock, through which dashed a headlong torrent, crossed by a single plank. "You must be mad to have taken this road," cried Turpin, gazing down into the roaring depths in which the waterfall raged, and measuring the distance of the pass with his eye. So, Bess. Ay, look at it, wench. Curse me, Luke, if you think your horse will do it, and therefore turn him loose." But Dick might as well have bidden the cataract to flow backwards. Luke struck his heels into his horse's sides. The steed galloped to the brink, snorted, and refused the leap. "I told you so. He can't do it," said Turpin. "Well, if you're obstinate, a wilful man must have his way. Stand aside while I try it for you." Patting Bess, he put her to the gallop. She cleared the gulf bravely, landing her rider safely upon the opposite rock. "Now then," cried Turpin, from the other side of the chasm. Luke again urged his steed. Encouraged by what he had seen, this time the horse sprang across without hesitation. The next